I sought solitude in the depths of the woods. I craved peace, a respite from the city's clamor and rush. I yearned to feel the tranquility of nature, to find some quiet time for myself. I packed my backpack with essentials and drove until I found the perfect spot. The trees stood tall and thick, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. It was exactly what I had been searching for. I set up my tent in a small clearing surrounded by trees. The ground was soft, covered with fallen leaves, and the air smelled fresh and clean. A sense of peace washed over me as I prepared my campsite. I built a small fire, cooked dinner, and sat down to enjoy the calm evening. As the sun began to set, the sky turned a beautiful shade of orange and pink. The forest seemed to glow in the soft light, and I felt completely at ease. Night fell, and I settled into my tent. I looked forward to a good night's sleep in the quiet woods. As I lay there, I started to hear a faint whistling sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind blowing through the trees. It was a gentle, almost musical sound, and I didn't pay much attention to it. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the whistling grew louder. It was no longer a soft, distant sound. It seemed to be coming closer, getting stronger with each passing hour. I sat up in my tent, my heart pounding. I listened carefully, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be moving around, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. I told myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that was growing inside me. I decided to step out of my tent and take a look around. The forest was dark, with only the light of the moon filtering through the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around the campsite. The whistling stopped for a moment, and I thought maybe I had imagined it. But then it started again, louder and closer than before. I walked around the clearing, trying to find the source of the sound. I saw nothing unusual, just the trees and the shadows they cast. As I was about to head back to my tent, my flashlight beam caught something strange. There were carvings on the trees around my campsite, eerie symbols and strange marks that I hadn't noticed before. They seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, and a chill ran down my spine. The whistling grew louder, almost unbearable now. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. Something was wrong. I needed to leave. I quickly packed up my things, my hands shaking. The whistling was so loud it felt like it was inside my head. As I started to head back the way I had come, I saw them. Strange, shadowy figures standing between the trees, blocking my path. They didn't move, just stood there watching me. My heart raced, and I felt a surge of panic. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, hoping to find another way out. The figures seemed to follow me, always just at the edge of my vision. No matter which way I turned, they were there, blocking my escape. The whistling was deafening now, a high-pitched sound that gave me a headache. I stumbled through the dark forest, trying to find my way out. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. In a desperate bid to escape, I remembered the trail I had come in on. I turned and ran towards it, hoping it would lead me back to safety. The figures were closer now, almost within reach. I could feel their presence pressing in on me, cold and menacing. I pushed myself harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, I saw the edge of the forest. I burst out into the open, the whistling suddenly stopping. The silence was almost as frightening as the sound had been. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I jumped in, started the engine, and drove away as fast as I could. My heart was still pounding, and my hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I reached safety, but I knew I would never forget what had happened in those woods. The eerie whistling, the strange carvings, and the shadowy figures would haunt my dreams forever. Camping had always been something I enjoyed when I was younger, but this time was different. I was camping with my kids, Emma and Jack, for the first time. They were nervous, especially since it was their first time spending the night in the woods. We had set up our tent in a small clearing, surrounded by tall, dense trees. The air was fresh, and the smell of pine needles filled the air. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over everything. We spent the evening roasting marshmallows over the campfire and telling stories. The kids laughed and seemed to relax a bit, but I could still see the nervousness in their eyes. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. As night fell, the darkness around us seemed to grow thicker, and the forest felt more mysterious. We climbed into our tent, settling into our sleeping bags. Emma and Jack snuggled close to me, seeking comfort in the unfamiliar surroundings. I read them a story to help them relax, and soon their eyes grew heavy. Just as they were drifting off to sleep, a strange noise echoed through the trees. It was a soft, almost whispering sound, like leaves rustling together. Emma stirred and looked at me with wide eyes. "Don't worry," I whispered, trying to sound calm. "It's just the wind." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. I listened closely, straining to hear if the noise would come again. For a few moments, there was nothing but the gentle sound of the breeze. Then, just as I started to relax, I heard it again. This time it was closer. It sounded like something moving slowly through the underbrush. My heart began to race. I didn't want to scare the kids, so I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I reached for the flashlight and clicked it on, casting a beam of light around the inside of the tent. The kids huddled closer, their eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," I said softly. "Let's just see what it is." I unzipped the tent flap slowly and shone the flashlight outside. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the trees and bushes around our campsite. Everything seemed still. I listened again, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Suddenly, there was a soft thud, and the tent shook slightly. It felt like something had pressed against the fabric from the outside. Emma gasped, and Jack grabbed my arm tightly. I shone the flashlight around frantically, trying to see what it was. The tent shook again, more forcefully this time, and I heard a low growling noise. Fear gripped me. I had no idea what was out there, and the kids were terrified. I had to protect them, but I felt helpless. The growling grew louder, and the tent shook violently. Emma started to cry, and Jack buried his face in my side. "Stay close," I whispered, my voice shaking. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The growling ceased, and the forest fell silent once more. I held my breath, listening for any sign of movement. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a soft, familiar sound. A meow. Relief washed over me as I realized what had happened. Our cat, Whiskers, had followed us into the woods. She must have gotten lost and found her way to our tent, seeking shelter. I couldn't believe it. The whole time, we had been scared out of our wits by our pet. I unzipped the tent flap and stepped outside, calling softly for Whiskers. She appeared from the shadows, her eyes glowing in the flashlight beam. I scooped her up and held her close, feeling her purr against my chest. Emma and Jack peeked out of the tent, their fear turning to surprise. "It's just Whiskers," I said, smiling. The kids came out and hugged the cat, relieved and happy to see her. We brought Whiskers into the tent and settled back down. The kids snuggled close to me again, but this time they were smiling. As we lay there, I couldn't help but laugh at the situation. We had been so scared, thinking there was something dangerous outside, only to find out it was our mischievous cat. It was a reminder that sometimes our fears can get the best of us, and things aren't always as they seem. The rest of the night passed peacefully. Whiskers curled up at our feet, and the kids fell asleep quickly, their earlier fear forgotten. I stayed awake a little longer, listening to the sounds of the forest and feeling grateful for the unexpected comfort of our furry friend. In the morning, the sun rose, casting a golden light over the campsite. The forest, which had seemed so frightening in the dark, now looked beautiful and inviting. We packed up our things, and the kids chattered excitedly about their adventure, no longer afraid of the woods. As we headed back home, I realized that this camping trip had been a success after all. We had faced our fears, found comfort in each other, and discovered that even in the darkest moments, there could be a light waiting to guide us. I love camping. Being out in nature always makes me feel free and alive. This summer, I decided to camp by the lake where my family used to go when I was a kid. The lake was beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and filled with clear water. The sound of birds and the smell of pine always brought back good memories. My father used to take me here. He loved this place. We would fish, swim, and tell stories by the campfire. But my father passed away 5 years ago. It was hard for me to come back to this place without him. I missed him so much. I arrived at the lake in the afternoon. The sun was shining, and the sky was clear. I set up my tent near the water and gathered some wood for a fire later. I wanted to cook dinner and enjoy the peaceful evening. As the sun started to set, I lit the fire and cooked some fish I had caught earlier. The smell of the cooking fish filled the air, and it reminded me of the times my father and I cooked together. After dinner, I sat by the fire, looking at the stars. The night was calm, and the lake was still. I could hear the sound of the water gently lapping against the shore. It was a perfect night. But as I stared into the fire, I felt a strange chill. It was a sudden coldness that made me shiver. I looked around, but there was nothing unusual. I decided to take a walk by the lake to clear my head. The moon was bright, casting a silver light on the water. The trees cast long shadows, and the path was lit just enough for me to see where I was going. As I walked, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. My heart started to beat faster. I told myself it was just my imagination, and I kept walking. I reached the spot where my father and I used to fish. I stood there, looking at the water, remembering the good times we had. Suddenly, I saw something on the other side of the lake. It looked like a person standing by the water. My heart skipped a beat. I squinted my eyes to see better, and my blood ran cold. It was my father. He was standing there, looking at me. He wore the same clothes he always wore when we went fishing, a plaid shirt and old jeans. His face was pale, and his eyes looked sad. I froze. This couldn't be real. My father was dead. I closed my eyes and shook my head, hoping he would disappear. When I opened my eyes, he was still there, staring at me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the ghostly figure of my father. He raised his hands slowly and pointed to the water. My mind was racing. What did he want? Why was he here? Gathering all my courage, I took a step forward, then another, slowly. I walked around the lake towards him. My heart was pounding, and my breath was shallow. As I got closer, I could see him more clearly. His eyes seemed to follow my every move. When I was just a few feet away, he lowered his hand and looked at the water again. I followed his gaze and saw something floating in the water. It looked like an old wooden box. I looked back at my father, but he was gone, vanished into thin air. My legs felt weak, and I almost fell. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I had to get that box. I waded into the water, the coldness biting at my skin. The box was heavier than I expected, but I managed to drag it to the shore. I sat down, soaked and shivering, and opened the box. Inside, I found old photos, letters, and a fishing lure that belonged to my father. Tears filled my eyes as I looked through the items. These were memories, pieces of my past that I thought were lost forever. Among the letters, I found one addressed to me. It was in my father's handwriting. My dear son, if you are reading this, it means you have found the box. I hid it here because I wanted you to have these memories. They are a part of who we are and a part of our time together. I love you, and I am always with you, even if you can't see me. Take care of yourself, and remember the good times we had. The lake will always be a special place for us. Love, Dad. I sat there, clutching the letter, tears streaming down my face. My father had reached out to me from beyond the grave to give me this gift. I felt a sense of peace, knowing he was watching over me. The fear and confusion melted away, replaced by a warm feeling of love and connection. I spent the rest of the night by the fire, looking through the photos and letters, remembering my father and the times we shared. The lake was still and quiet, and the stars twinkled above. I knew that my father was still with me in spirit, and that he would always be a part of my life. The next morning, as the sun rose over the lake, I packed up my things and prepared to leave. I took one last look at the water, grateful for the experience. As I walked away, I felt a gentle breeze, as if my father was saying goodbye. I knew I would come back to this place again. The lake held our memories, and now it also had part of my father's spirit.